Life constantly reminds us that people enter and exit our lives. We build bonds, form deep connections, and anchor our emotions to these relationships. However, when these bonds break, it can be difficult to process the emotional weight of losing someone's presence. Sometimes, we find ourselves caring deeply for someone who never shared the same level of emotional investment. In such moments, a natural question arises: how does one stop caring? Is it truly possible to detach emotionally without feeling like a part of oneself has been lost? Stoic philosophy, particularly the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, provides valuable guidance in navigating such emotional challenges. The Stoics were not advocates of emotional suppression, but rather masters of understanding emotions and regulating their influence on our lives. Emotional detachment, from a Stoic perspective, does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. Instead, it is about regaining clarity, control, and inner peace. A fundamental Stoic principle revolves around recognizing the impermanence of all things. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that everything we perceive is a matter of opinion, not an absolute truth. Often, our emotional attachments are strengthened by the narratives we create about people and their significance in our lives. However, the reality remains that all relationships are transient. A person who was once deeply connected to us may drift away due to circumstances, distance, or the natural evolution of relationships. Accepting this impermanence allows us to live more fully in the present rather than clinging to something that is bound to change. A useful analogy for this perspective is trying to hold on to a handful of sand. The tighter one grips, the faster the sand slips away. Similarly, the more we attempt to possess or control a connection, the more it eludes us. In personal experiences, many have encountered relationships that once felt unbreakable but eventually faded. This transition can be painful, especially when one resists the change. However, acknowledging that every connection has its course can relieve much of the emotional burden. Marcus Aurelius would have encouraged acceptance rather than resistance, emphasizing that suffering is minimized when one embraces the natural flow of life. Another crucial insight from Stoicism is the understanding that emotions do not control us. Rather, they are influenced by our thoughts and interpretations. When experiencing pain, sadness, or frustration, it is often because of the meaning we assign to events rather than the events themselves. Marcus Aurelius believed that the mind holds ultimate power over one's responses. He advised that individuals have control over their thoughts, not external events, and in realizing this, they can find true strength. For instance, after a breakup, one might be consumed with analyzing past conversations, questioning why things happen a certain way, or feeling distressed about how easily the other person seems to have moved on. The Stoic approach to such a situation would be to shift focus away from emotions and instead examine the objective reality. Instead of dwelling on pain, one could ask, what are the facts? How can this situation be viewed differently? Choosing thoughts that free rather than trap the mind in suffering is essential for emotional detachment. One common scenario where this applies is when a message to a loved one goes unanswered for an extended period. The mind may instinctively create a narrative, perhaps assuming something is wrong or that the person no longer cares. This emotional reaction, however, is based on speculation rather than fact. The Stoic approach would be to step back and challenge the automatic response. The only undeniable truth is that the message has not yet received a reply. Any additional thoughts are merely interpretations. A personal example illustrates this principle well. A conversation with a close friend had suddenly ceased, and as the hours passed, anxiety crept in. Thoughts spiraled, wondering if something had been said to upset them or if the friendship was in jeopardy. Yet, upon pausing to evaluate the situation logically, it became clear that no actual conflict had occurred. The friend had simply become preoccupied with other responsibilities. When they eventually responded the next day, the worry and distress from the night before seemed entirely unnecessary. This experience reinforced Marcus Aurelius' wisdom. Focus only on what is within one's control, particularly thoughts and actions, rather than external outcomes. Another powerful Stoic exercise is negative visualization, which involves deliberately contemplating loss, not to dwell in sorrow, but to mentally prepare for inevitable changes. At first, this may seem like an unsettling practice. Why think about losing something or someone important? However, this technique strengthens emotional resilience. By imagining scenarios where certain attachments are no longer present, one becomes less dependent on them for happiness. This practice helps develop gratitude for the present while also reducing fear and anxiety about the future. In essence, emotional detachment does not mean shutting oneself off from feeling. Instead, it is about achieving balance, understanding that people and situations change, controlling one's thoughts to prevent unnecessary suffering, and preparing the mind to gracefully accept life's uncertainties. Through Stoic wisdom, it is possible to navigate relationships with greater clarity, strength, and peace, allowing for deeper and more meaningful connections without becoming overwhelmed by their inevitable transformations. Imagining the worst-case scenario in advance lessens its emotional impact when, or if it actually happens. This does not mean adopting a fatalistic or pessimistic outlook, but rather training oneself to accept reality as it is rather than how one wishes it to be. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius advised against overwhelming oneself by imagining all of life's potential troubles at once. Instead, he encouraged facing each challenge as it arises with calmness and self-control. This practice, often referred to as negative visualization, is a way to build resilience and emotional strength. Consider the experience of being deeply attached to someone, a partner, a friend, or a family member. Now, imagine life without them. Picture their absence in daily routines and interactions. The mere thought of such a loss likely feels uncomfortable, even painful. That discomfort is the essence of the exercise. The Stoics believe that by mentally confronting the emotional distress of loss in advance, one could reduce its ability to devastate them when it actually occurs. A personal experience illustrates this principle. There was a time when a close friend was considering moving overseas. Having been inseparable for years, the idea of their absence filled me with dread. However, rather than suppress the fear, I chose to confront it directly. Each day, I visualized what life would be like without them, going through my daily activities, socializing with other friends, and finding joy in new experiences. By the time they eventually moved, the loss still stung, but the emotional preparation made all the difference. Instead of being overwhelmed by grief and loneliness, I had already rehearsed the transition, making it easier to adapt. Another crucial aspect of negative visualization is the recognition that loss is an unavoidable part of life. Everything cherished will eventually change or be lost, whether through separation, transformation, or death. This idea is not meant to be morbid, but liberating. When the expectation of permanence is abandoned, so too is the feeling of entitlement to it. In turn, the fear of losing what one holds dear diminishes. This perspective is particularly relevant in relationships. People often enter relationships assuming they will last indefinitely, rarely planning for their potential end. However, the truth is that nothing is guaranteed. Rather than clinging to the illusion of permanence, a Stoic approach is to appreciate relationships while they exist, fully aware that they will inevitably evolve or conclude. This shift in mindset can be incredibly freeing. There was a period in my life when I was in a relationship that constantly made me anxious. The thought of losing that person consumed me, making it difficult to enjoy the present. However, once I began practicing negative visualization, my outlook changed. Instead of desperately trying to control the relationship's outcome, I imagined life without it. Although the thought was painful, it served as a reminder to be grateful for present. When the relationship eventually ended, I found myself far more prepared for the emotional transition than I had anticipated. The true benefit of negative visualization is that it fosters inner resilience. By repeatedly envisioning worst-case scenarios, a person develops a sense of emotional stability that is not easily shaken by life's inevitable changes. This practice reinforces the understanding that, regardless of what happens, one will be okay. It is the ultimate form of emotional detachment. Not detachment from life itself, but from the illusion that stability and happiness depend on things remaining unchanged. One of the most empowering realizations that can be embraced is the distinction between what is within personal control and what is not. This understanding is central to Stoic philosophy and plays a vital role in emotional resilience. A significant source of pain in relationships arises from the desire to control things beyond one's influence. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, repeatedly emphasized the importance of focusing only on what can be controlled, one's own thoughts, actions, and responses, while recognizing that everything else, including other people's behavior, the outcomes of situations, and the passage of time, lies outside of one's control. The more one attempts to exert control over external circumstances, the more they suffer. Emotional detachment, therefore, is not about withdrawing from others with cold indifference, but rather about letting go of the need to dictate outcomes that cannot be controlled. When deeply attached to someone, whether a romantic partner, friend, or family member, it is natural to desire a certain level of reciprocity in affection and commitment. However, by accepting that the thoughts and feelings of others are beyond control, one can cultivate a greater sense of peace and emotional freedom. The reality of human relationships is that you cannot control how others feel or behave. No amount of effort, persuasion, or affection can force someone to love you, appreciate you, or treat you with the respect you deserve. The only thing truly within your power is how you respond to their actions. Consider a time in your life when you tried to influence someone's feelings or behavior. Perhaps you went out of your way, making endless sacrifices to win someone's affection, or you exhausted yourself proving your worth to a friend who never fully valued you. How did that experience make you feel? Likely, it left you frustrated, anxious, and powerless because you were chasing something beyond your control. Reflecting on my own experiences, I once found myself in a relationship where I constantly felt the need to keep things together. I poured energy into planning thoughtful dates, sending meaningful messages, and being emotionally available. Despite all my efforts, I always felt one step behind. Every time they pulled away, I tried harder, caught in an exhausting cycle of seeking validation. This relentless pursuit only deepened my anxiety because I was trying to control how they felt about me. It wasn't until I embraced the Stoic principle of focusing only on what I could control, my own actions and self-worth, that I began to break free from that cycle. I realized that no amount of effort could make someone love me more or treat me better. The only thing I could control was my response, and in that realization, I chose to detach. Letting go of that emotional burden brought immense relief and clarity. One of the most liberating things you can do for yourself is to embrace emotional autonomy. The understanding that your happiness, peace, and emotional stability do not depend on someone else's behavior or feelings. When you place your emotional well-being in the hands of another person, you surrender your power, becoming a prisoner to their moods, actions, and decisions. Imagine a friendship where you constantly feel sidelined. Your friend no longer makes time for you like they used to, and you feel neglected. Naturally, this hurts, and you might find yourself ruminating over what you did wrong, or why they have pulled away. However, their behavior is outside of your control. The only thing you can govern is how you respond. Will you continue investing energy into someone who does not reciprocate, or will you redirect your focus toward relationships and activities that genuinely bring you joy and fulfillment? By shifting your attention to what you can control, your own emotional state, you begin reclaiming your power. You no longer wait for validation or attention to feel whole. Instead, you cultivate an internal equilibrium that remains steady, independent of external circumstances. There have been times in my life when I placed too much importance on how others treated me. If someone was distant or dismissive, I felt unworthy. If they were warm and attentive, I felt valued. This emotional roller coaster was exhausting. However, when I started applying Stoic principles, I made a conscious decision to stop letting others' actions dictate my self-worth. Instead, I focus on nurturing my own emotional well-being, independent of their behavior. This shift didn't mean I cared any less. Rather, it meant I stopped allowing external factors to control my inner peace. The ultimate goal of emotional detachment is not indifference, but acceptance. Acceptance of the fact that life and people are unpredictable, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. We cannot control everything. Instead of resisting this truth, we must learn to accept situations as they are, not as we wish them to be. Take, for example, a painful breakup. You feel lost, hurt, and overwhelmed. Your mind races with questions. What if I had done something differently? Why did this happen? Can I fix this? These thoughts are rooted in the desire to control an outcome that has already passed. Instead of tormenting yourself with what-ifs, a Stoic approach would be to accept the reality of the situation. Marcus Aurelius famously wrote, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, obstacles are not roadblocks, but opportunities for growth. When you accept what is outside your control, you stop wasting energy trying to change the past or influence others, and instead focus on how to move forward. I recall a time when I experienced the sudden and painful end of a relationship I believed to be stable. At first, I was consumed by the need to understand why it happened and whether I could have prevented it. However, I eventually realized that the only path to peace was to accept reality. I could not change the past or control how the other person felt. What I could control was how I reacted to the loss. Rather than clinging to what was gone, I embraced my present reality and found strength and acceptance. When entangled in the emotions of a difficult relationship or situation, it's easy to lose perspective. Stoic philosophy, particularly through the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, urges us to step back and consider the bigger picture. He emphasized that our troubles, fears, and desires are merely fleeting moments in the vastness of time. By adopting this broader perspective, emotional detachment becomes easier. Ask yourself, will this pain matter in 5 years? Does this person truly define my entire existence? Shifting your focus from immediate emotional turmoil to a higher level reflection helps you realize that much of your distress is tied to temporary circumstances. When you're overly attached to someone, it's easy to make them the center of your universe, entangling your happiness and self-worth with their presence or absence. However, stepping back and seeing the bigger picture reminds you that life is always changing and that relationships, no matter how intense, are just one part of your journey. If you reflect on past breakups or challenging moments, you'll recognize that what once felt like the end of your world eventually passed. Those wounds healed, and you emerged stronger and wiser. This is the natural rhythm of life. I remember experiencing a breakup that felt like an insurmountable loss. For weeks, I fixated on the past, feeling as though my future had lost its brightness. But as time passed, I allowed myself to reflect on the bigger picture. I realized that this person, while meaningful, was not the defining element of my life. They were part of my journey, but they did not define my entire story. By zooming out, I saw the relationship as one chapter in a much larger narrative and gradually found the strength to emotionally detach. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, emphasized the impermanence of all things, relationships, emotions, and circumstances. Everything in life is transient, and what truly matters is how we respond to these inevitable changes. By reflecting on the bigger picture, you cultivate inner peace, recognizing that life continues regardless of temporary attachments. Emotional detachment is not about apathy. It's about understanding that life is much larger than any single person, relationship, or moment of pain. By viewing your life as an interconnected web of experiences, you free yourself from the tunnel vision that emotional attachment often creates. Ultimately, emotional detachment is not about shutting down your emotions or distancing yourself from others. It's about building resilience and gaining control over how you respond to life's inevitable changes. The Stoic path does not offer a quick fix, but a lifelong practice leading to inner peace. By embracing impermanence, mastering your emotions through rational thought, and reflecting on the bigger picture, you'll find that emotional detachment is an act of self-liberation. So, the next time you feel yourself gripping too tightly to someone or something, ask yourself, do I control my emotions or do they control me? Emotional freedom awaits those who dare to let go.